Hey everybody, this is a chapter from Robert J. Alexander's book, The Right Opposition, the Lovestoneites and the International Communist Opposition of the 1930s. This chapter is titled, This chapter is titled, The Spanish Communist Opposition from Bloque, Obrero y Campesino to the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification. I'm doing like a reading group with some pals about the Spanish Civil War, or not. That's not the reading group's about, but that's what this particular meeting's about. And I'm trying to get a better feel for some of the political tendencies operative in Spain at this time. And of course, an important grouping of that is the POUM. I already read the chapter that comes after this chapter, titled "The POUM and the Spanish Civil War," because that seemed like it was more pertinent. But now that I've got covered like what seemed to be the most important base, I can get back to I can step back and read something that's a little more less specific to the topic that I plan on discussing. But I hope you get something out of this if you listen to this. Where am I? Come on. So it says it's on page 184. Alright guys, you with me? This is like a fun little thing I do. Is that I guess how many pages I actually have to skip on a PDF to get to the page that I want to get to. So the page is 184. I'm going to guess about 11 pages ahead of that. So I'm going to type in 185. Not 185, 195. Let's see if I get to the right one. Hey! How about that, dude? First, go! Okay, so here we go. The most famous party associated with the international communist opposition was the Spanish group first called Bloque, Obrero y Campesino. Spanish Wikipedia says, Workers and Peasants Bloc, Obrero y Campesino Bloc, BOC, in Catalan, Bloc Obrero y Campero in Catalan, was a Spanish political organization of Marxist ideology founded in 1930 in Barcelona as a result of the merger of the Partit Comunista Català and Catalan Balearic Communist Federation, FCCB. It also incorporated Valencian militants from the Levante Communist Federation. The formation was born as opposition to the official communism of the Communist International, or Third International, represented by the Communist Party of Spain of the time. Its main leaders, among whom were Hilari Arlandis, FCL, Jordi Arquer, Pere Bonet, Victor Colomer, Yibert Estartas, Angel Estivi, Daniel Domingo, Juame Miravitles, Daniel Rubu, David Ray, Antonio Sese, Abelard Tona, and Joaquin Marin. General Secretary, advocated a federation of socialist nations within Spain while demanding revolutionary struggle, dissolution of religious congregations, proletarian internationalism based on the autonomy of national parties, and the right of self-determination of Catalonia. At the same time, they opposed the subversive apoliticism of the FAI and the moderate social policy of the Esquerra Republicana de Catalunya. in an attempt to attract workers who were largely affiliated with the CNT but lacked their own political party. The militants came from the industrial centers of Catalonia, from some towns in Valencia, and also from some parts of the peasant-affiliated Unió de Basaires and the Federación de Trabajadores de la Tierra. In the 1931 election, the BOC obtained 20,000 votes, and membership reached about 5,000. In 1933, it proposed the creation of the Workers' Alliance and participated in the events of the October 6, 1934 proclamation of the Catalan state under the banner of worker unity, from which a faction of the BOC did not want to exclude any organization, establishing contacts with the United Socialist Party of Catalonia, the Partit Català Proletari, and the selections of Catalonia of the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party and the Communist Party of Spain, which led to the merger into the Partit Socialista Unificat de Catalunya in 1936. Another faction joined with Andrew Nin's Communist Left, EC, in November 1935 to form the Marxist Unification Workers' Party. As organs of the BOC, the Spanish-language weekly La Batalla, 1930, Hora y Front, 1932, from Barcelona, and Esperna, 1932, and Avant, 1932, from the regions of Girona and Lleida, stood out. Okay, so that's the Bloque, Obrero y Campesino. During most of its existence, the Bloque, Obrero y Campesino was larger and more important in national politics than the official Spanish Communist Party. The Bloque, Obrero, Campesino was larger and more important in national politics than the official Spanish Communist Party, and the Bloque, Obrero y Campesino leader, Joaquín Marín, was the country's outstanding Marxist thinker. During the Spanish Civil War, the Bloque, Obrero y Campesino successor, the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification, became the chief object of persecution of the official communists who were anxious to use the war circumstances to obtain absolute power within the Republic. The unequal struggle between the Communist Party and the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification had a major impact on the thinking not only of opposition communists in other countries, but also of non-Stalinist leftists throughout the world. New section. Antecedents of the Bloque, Obrero y Campesino. I don't know if it's block or bloque. I don't know. At the inception of the communist opposition in Spain, the country's labor and political left were badly divided. From the beginning of the labor movement in the latter decades of the 19th century, it had been split into two basic groupings: anarcho-syndicalists and socialists. The anarcho-syndicalist principal strength lay in Catalonia, but the anarcho-syndicalists had great influence also in Valencia and southern Spain. The socialist control centered on Madrid, but they had adherents also in the northern and western parts of the country. By the early decades of the 20th century, the schism had taken organic form. The Unión General de Trabajadores united those workers under socialist influence and was closely allied with the Partido Socialista Obrero Español, PSOE. The Confederación Nacional del Trabajo, CNT, was the major organization of anarchist and syndicalist workers. After World War I, the Communist Party further divided the left labor forces. The party drew its first cadres from the socialist UGT ranks in the CNT. Those communists who were later to form the Bloque, Obrero y Campesino came mainly from the latter group. The Communist Party was marked by factionalism from the beginning. Two different communist parties first emerged from dissident elements of the Partido Socialista Obrero Español. The Comintern sent Jules Humbert Dros, its Latin secretary, to Spain to bring those factions into a single party which Jules Humbert Dros finally succeeded in doing. However, factionalism continued to characterize Spanish communism. Jules Humbert Droz was a Swiss pastor, journalist, socialist, and communist. He lived from 1891 to 1971. A founding member of the Communist Party of Switzerland, Jules, or I guess maybe he's coming from France, I guess it's Jules Humbert Droz. I don't fucking know. Held high Comintern office through the 1920s and also acted as Comintern emissary to several West European countries. He was involved in the right opposition in 1928. Jules Humbert Droz joined the Swiss Socialist Party in the 1940s and served as its secretary from 1946 to 1965. Back to the text. One group which contributed to the formation of the Spanish Communist Party originated in the anarcho-syndicalist movement. Joaquin Marin was one of the delegates to the CNT sent to the Third Congress of the Comintern in 1921. Joaquin Marin and others attended the founding Congress of the Red International of Labor Unions, which met simultaneously with the Communist International Third Congress to establish a trade union confederation closely allied with the Comintern. Upon the returning to Spain, the CNT delegates were divided concerning whether the CNT should affiliate with the RILU. At least in part due to the jailing of Marin, who favored joining, the CNT finally decided not to do so, but rather to send delegates to the founding Congress of the Anarcho-Syndicalist International Working Men's Association, IWA, to be held in Berlin in 1922. Joaquin Marin disagreed strongly with the position of the majority of the CNT. He was already a figure of some prestige. He had started his adult life as a teacher in the Catalan provincial city of Lleida. During his two-year military service, he came into contact with socialist ideas and came to regard himself as a socialist. He was attracted to the CNT, the dominant labor organization of his region, and started issuing a CNT newspaper in Lleida. Like many others, he was deeply influenced by the Bolshevik Revolution. After returning from the Comintern and RILU congresses in Moscow, Marin led in forming the Comité de Sindicalistas Revolucionarios. Revolutionary Trade Union Committee, composed of CNT members who supported affiliation with the RILU. I can't find anything specifically for that. The Comité launched a weekly La Battaglia, which put out 300 copies of its first issue. People associated with the Comité controlled three major CNT unions in Barcelona: transport workers, hotel workers, and textile workers. Marin and other dissident CNTers of Catalonia formed a regional federation of the new Communist Party, the Communist Federation of Catalonia and the Balearic Islands. Federación Comunista Catalana Balear. When the dictatorship of Primo de Rivera suppressed the official newspaper of the CNT, Solidaridad Obrera, at the end of 1923, La Battaglia incorporated in its editorial board the previous editors of the CNT organ until the CNT leadership forbade their members to participate in La Battaglia. Wikipedia says Miguel Primo de Rivera lived from 1870 to 1930, was a Spanish dictator and military officer who ruled as a prime minister of Spain from 1923 to 1930 during the last years of the Bourbon Restoration. Miguel Primo de Rivera was born into a landowning family of Andalusian aristocrats. Miguel Primo de Rivera met his baptism by fire in October 1893 in Cabreritzas, Atlas during the so-called Margallo War. He moved up the military ladder, promoted to brigadier general in 1911, division general in 1914, and lieutenant general in 1919. He went on to serve as administrator of the Valencia, Madrid, and Barcelona military regions, distinguishing himself as a voice in favor of military withdrawal from Africa. During the crisis of the Restoration regime, specifically upon political turmoil in the wake of the setbacks in the Rif War and the ensuing spillover of the inquiries of the Picasso file, Primo de Rivera staged a military coup d'etat on the 13th of September 1923 with help from a clique of Africanist generals close to King Alfonso XIII. The coup enjoyed the acquiescence of the monarch, and Primo de Rivera was ensuingly tasked to form a government. Primo de Rivera thereby proceeded to suspend the 1876 Constitution and establish martial law. Miguel Primo de Rivera's dictatorial rule was marked by authoritarian nationalism and populism. Primo de Rivera initially said he would rule for only 90 days, however he chose to remain in power, heading a military directorate. In December 1925, after the Alhucemas landing ended Rifian anti-colonial resistance, Miguel Primo de Rivera installed a civil directory. From 1927, a policy of public spending on infrastructures was pursued, and state monopolies such as oil company COMSA were created. Once economic tailwinds diminished, he lost the support of most of his generals, and he was forced to resign in January 1930 amid increasing inflation and civic unrest, dying abroad 2 months later. Some of his children, such as Jose Antonio and Pilar, went on to become fascist leaders. So that's Primo de Rivera. Solidaridad Obrera, Spanish for Workers' Solidarity, is a newspaper published by the Catalan Balearic regional section of the anarchist labor union Confederación Nacional del Trabajo, CNT, and mouthpiece of the CNT in Spain. So I guess it still exists. The paper takes its name from the organization of the same name that started in 1907 and reorganized the labor movement in Spain based on the structure of the Federación de Trabajadores de la Región Española, FTRE. The name has been used by numerous anarchist periodicals in several countries. The newspaper Solidaridad Obrera was first published on the 19th of October 1907 in Barcelona, Catalonia, Spain, as the mouthpiece of the Solidaridad Obrera Federación, Federation, and has been published in different forms up till today, now consisting of an online version as well as a print version that has a print run of up to 5,000 copies that have been distributed for free since 2005. Back to the text. Because of its relatively large size, the working-class nature of the Catalan region, and the leadership of Joaquin Marín, the Catalonian Balearic Federation of the Spanish Communist Party played a major role in the party's affairs during the 1920s. However, it had continuing discrepancies with the National Party leadership. Faced with the military dictatorship of General Primo de Rivera, the Madrid leadership of the Communist Party adopted a passive attitude, seeking to maintain the legality of the party. Marín and his associates objected, and in plenum in Madrid in November 1923, they forced resignation of the national leadership. A new trio led by Marín took charge of the Communist Party's affairs. Under Marín's leadership, the party began to build an underground organization and issued a new illegal periodical, Vanguardia. It issued a new illegal periodical, Vanguardia, which attacked the dictatorship with great rigor, and in January 1925 provoked the arrest of most of the top leaders of the party, including Joachim Marin. They were held in jail for almost 3 years and then were deported to France. With the arrest of Marin and other party leaders, Moscow undertook to appoint a new leadership for the Spanish party. A conference was held in Moscow which decided to entrust the party to José Bullejos, Gabriel Leon Tria, and a Catalan, Adame. Wikipedia says, José Bullejos y Sánchez lived from 1899 to 1974 and was a Spanish communist politician. He served as the second general secretary of the Communist Party of Spain from 1925 to 1932. Gabriel Leon Tria lived from 1899 to 1945 and was a Spanish communist leader who was one of the founders of the Spanish Communist Party while in exile in Paris in the 1920s. Gabriel Leon Tria was expelled from the party in 1932 for supporting the Republican government, but was readmitted at the start of the Spanish Civil War in 1936 to 1939. During World War II, Gabriel Leon Tria helped organize Spanish refugees in Spain as members of the French resistance, then moved to Spain where he ran an underground newspaper. Gabriel Leon Tria was assassinated in 1945 on the orders of the Communist Party of Spain on the grounds that his independent actions had endangered other communists. And Manuel Adame lived from 1901 to 1945 and was an Andalusian trade unionist and politician, initially an anarcho-syndicalist in the Confederación Nacional del Trabajo, CNT. In 1927, Manuel Adame became a leading member of the Communist Party of Spain and in Andalusia. In 1932, Manuel Adame was rejected from the PCE due to his conflicts with the leadership of the Communist International and subsequently joined the Unión General de Trabajadores, UGT, and Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, PSOE. Manuel Adame was active in the Republican side of the Spanish Civil War and after its defeat fled to Moscow where he died. Back to the text. This new party leadership undertook the task of, quote, Bolshevizing the Spanish party, that is, of wiping out all dissidents and centralizing all power in the national leadership. At the same time, Bullejos, Tria, and Adame, quote, the Troika, end quote, sought to adhere closely to all directives from the Comintern. Meanwhile, grave disagreements arose between the Catalan Federation on the one hand and the National Party and Comintern on the other. The Marin group insisted that the party continue energetic underground activities against the dictatorship, while the national leadership and the Comintern favored a more conciliatory policy. Early in 1927, when Moscow ordered the Spanish party to participate in a consultative assembly, Primo de Rivera was about to name as a pseudo-parliament. The Marin group strongly opposed participation. Marin himself later noted the impact of the Comintern decision upon the Spanish communists. Quote, the thesis of the Communist International produced perturbations within the party. The few members who were left in the face of the errors and the permanent guillotine of the bureaucracy were abandoning it in the face of such a mistaken policy. The party entered a phase of virtual liquidation, end quote. Joachim Marin. Even the, quote, Troika finally realized the disastrous nature of the orders from Moscow. They summoned a party conference attended by a Comintern delegate which decided not to participate in the consultative assembly. Victor Alba, the historian of the POUM, has commented that, quote, this was the last independent act of the Spanish Communist Party, end quote. The, quote, Troika sought to undermine Marin and the Catalan leadership. They accused Marin in Moscow of being a, quote, rightist and, quote, undisciplined. However, Andrei Nin, the party's, I think it says here Andres Nin, but I think if you look him up on the internet, it says Andrew Nin. Let's see. Come on. Let's see. It says in Spanish it is Andres Nin, so maybe I'm saying it wrong.
Andres Nin.
Andres Nin, so I've been saying it wrong. In the other video I say it wrong, so I was saying Andrew Nin, because that's what it says on Wikipedia, but it doesn't matter. You know what I'm talking about. However, Andres Nin, the party's permanent representative at Comintern headquarters, came to the defense of the Catalans and published an article in International Press Correspondence supporting Joaquin Marin and his colleagues. At the party's third Congress held in Paris, the, quote, Troika, end quote, denied Marin and Bonnet, two of the delegates of the Catalan Federation, their seats on the ground that since they were then resident in France, they were members of the French, not the Spanish party. This conference saw a new confrontation between the party's Stalinist leadership and the Catalan Federation, which had submitted a thesis on the future development of the revolutionary movement in Spain, which, according to Victor Alba, quote, said that the revolution would be democratic and ended proposing the slogan in that moment of dictators, the Federal Democratic Republic, end quote. Marin commented that about the conference, quote, the thesis of the Catalan Communist Federation was rejected by the Communist International as rightist. In its place, there was translated into Spanish the thesis for exportation of the, quote, democratic dictatorship of the workers and peasants, end quote, end quote. Marin. Marin added that the Communist International, quote, did not understand that we were on the eve of a democratic revolution, and the formula offered would result in a complete divorce between the political aspirations of the great masses of the workers and the Communist Party. To ask the substitution of one dictatorship for another was suicide, end quote. Marin. The Third Congress foreshadowed the rupture of the Catalan Federation with the Spanish Communist Party. The break came at a party conference in Bilbao in the following year. Victor Alba cites Marin as saying that the Catalan Federation did not in fact send any delegates to that conference because it already considered itself separated from the Spanish party. However, Bullejos wrote many years later that, quote, in 1930 the delegation of the Catalan Federation of the National Conference in Bilbao, I don't know if it's Bilbao or Bilbao, let's see, Bilbao. Bilbao. Changed its point of view of the policy of the Central Committee, accepting the latter's general position. This move was repudiated in Barcelona by the Federation, that organization was separated from the party by the Central Committee on the suggestion of the delegation from the International, end quote. Victor Alba maintained that, quote, the delegates, end quote, from Catalonia had in fact been picked by the Spanish party leadership. New section. Formation of the Bloque, Obrero y Campesino.
Bloque Obrero y Campesino.
Slow your ass down, yo.
Bloque.
Bloque. Okay, it is Bloque. Once formally expelled from the Spanish Communist Party, the Catalan Communist Federation had to decide upon its future role. As Victor Alba notes, quote, to enter any of the existing movements was unthinkable. All saw things from the point of view of that Marin considered catastrophic, end quote. The Catalan Communist Federation had one important tool at its disposal, the weekly newspaper La Batalla, which began to appear again after Joaquin Marin's return to Barcelona in May 1930. Victor Alba has written that, quote, it is hard for those who didn't live through the period before the Civil War to understand the role which the weekly had in the intellectual and political formation of the Catalans and of the Spaniards in general and in the work of organization. It was a much profounder role probably than that of the daily, in spite of the fact that the latter came out every day and weekly only each week or when it could appear, end quote. The circulation of most of these weeklies was small, few exceeding 1,000 copies per issue. La Batalla, however, began with a circulation of 3,000. Alba has underscored the key political role of the weeklies, quote, between the weekly and the reader there was established in a way a personal relationship, exactly because each reader needed his weekly and for that reason helped it in the very frequent periods of shortages of funds. He began to consider the weekly as his own, end quote. When the editor visited a town, he would meet with a group of his readers and would solicit their collaboration with the paper and support for ideas it presented. Therefore, with La Batalla as its spokesman, the Catalan Communist Federation had a good beginning in its efforts to attract adherents. The first necessity was to bring together all those who more or less agreed with the position the Federation had assumed. A new party had to be formed. Victor Alba has noted that, quote, at the beginning of 1930, when the dictator fell, there were no more than 500 members of the Communist Party. A third of them were in Catalan Balearic Federation. But there were many more, possibly thousands of sympathizers with communism, ... This sympathy gave the Catalan Balearic Federation its party, a potential party. It was only necessary to find it, to organize it. This was the immediate task of the Federation, end quote. There was one other group in Catalonia with ideas similar to those of the Federation, the Partit Comunista Català, PCC. It had its origins among young workers and intellectuals led by a school teacher from Lerida, Victor Colome, who had broken from the Catalan Communist Federation when the Comintern had ordered the Spanish Communists to enter Primo de Rivera's consultative assembly. Not seeing anything for Victor Colome. They had come to believe that it was no longer possible to change the Communist Party from within. They had also felt that there was need for a specifically Catalan Communist Party, which hopefully could come to be recognized as a separate member of the Communist International. They were joined by a few others who had not previously belonged to the Communist Federation. The most outstanding of these new recruits was a young commercial employee, Jordi Arquer. The Partit Comunista Català had been formally launched at a congress which met secretly on November 12, 1928 in a railroad warehouse in Lerida. The Secretary General of the new party was Domènec Ramon, a commercial worker. Soon after the founding of the PCC, its Barcelona members got control of an amateur theatrical group, which they used as a front for their activities. The Catalan-language periodical of the theater group was rechristened Treball, Labor, and it became the slightly disguised organ of the PCC. By 1930, the PCC had been between 200 and 250 members, compared with 150 to 200 in the Catalan Communist Federation. Viktor Alba has noted that the PCC felt, quote, morally, end quote, a member of the Comintern and believed that the obstacle to a correct policy was the Spanish Communist Party. It hoped that the International would ultimately recognize the PCC and accept it as an independent member party. There was sentiment within the Federation and the PCC for merging the two organizations. Many of their leaders were personal friends, and members of the two groups met frequently. However, it took considerable time to reach final agreement on a merger, but in July 1930, Joaquin Marin and Jordi Aguirre of the PCC were both jailed. In prison, they agreed upon the need to unify their groups, and soon after they were released, the final steps were taken. A clandestine meeting of members of the Federation was held on a beach not far from Barcelona and agreed to fusion with the PCC. At about the same time, in October 1930, the PCC held a Congress in which its majority also agreed on unity with the Catalan Federation. There were elements which did not support unity. Some of these people returned to the Communist Party, including the man in whose name the PCC paper, Treball, was legally registered. The result was that during the Civil War, Treball, by then a daily, became the official paper of the Stalinist Unified Socialist Party of Catalonia, the Partido Socialista Unificado de Catalunya, and was a bitter enemy of the former PCC members. The original date for the Unity Congress of the Federation and the PCC was December 1930. However, various factors forced a postponement, and it finally took place in March 1931 in a bar in the provincial town of Terrassa. It was recounted that the number of delegates was so small that one of them commented that, quote, "We are all in the family," end quote, then added, quote, "but so were the first Bolsheviks," end quote. Viktor Alba has noted that, quote, "The majority of the participants were young, came to maturity under the dictatorship without political or trade union experience, but there was a handful of old CNT militants and early members of the Communist Party," end quote. Viktor Alba. The delegates decided to establish officially two organizations, the first to consist of all existing members of the Federation and the PCC and would continue to be called Federación Comunista Catalana Balear. However, at its second Congress a year later, this organization was rechristened Federación Comunista Ibérica, thus reflecting the party's aspirations to become a Spanish rather than a Catalan organization. The second organization established by the Terrassa Convention was the Bloque Obrero y Campesino, BOC, Workers and Peasants Bloc. This was supposed to be a mass organization whose members would join the Federation, quote, "once prepared and educated politically," end quote. Bertram Wolfe, the United States Communist opposition leader, commented in 1932 that the Bloc was a, quote, "sort of permanent united front," end quote, "open only to communist sympathizers." I think Bertram Wolfe became an anti-communist eventually. Yeah, it says Bertram Wolfe lived from 1896 to 1977 and was an American scholar, leading communist and later leading anti-communist. He authored many works related to communism, including biographical studies of Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, Leon Trotsky, and Diego Rivera. Back to the text. However, Viktor Alba has noted that this apparent difference between Federation and Bloc tended to disappear in practice. In its organizational structure, the new Federation Bloc plainly followed the communist tradition. According to Viktor Alba, quote, "The model is the typical organization of communist parties, cells of 5 members at the base, neighborhood committees named by the cells, local committees named by the neighborhood groups, and a central committee elected by the Congress with the ability to designate an executive committee from among its members," end quote. Viktor Alba. However, Alba has noted that, quote, "What distinguished the Bloc from the communist parties is that the system functioned in fact and not only on paper. The Bloc received subsidies from no one, was sustained by the dues of its members, and in the cells these theses for Congresses were really discussed, as well as the resolution of the Central Committee, which met regularly, and the decisions of the Executive Committee. The Congresses were composed of delegates really elected to by the rank and file. Democratic centralism, which functioned among the Bolsheviks under Lenin but then ceased, became a reality in the Bloc," end quote. Viktor Alba. The Terrassa Congress elected the party's first central committee, which in turn named an executive committee with equal members of the Federation and the PCC. The first members of the executive committee were Joaquin Marin, General Secretary, David Ray, Pere Bonnet, Miguel Ferrer, Jordi Aguirre, Victor Colome, Art Van der Leyen. The new party started with about 700 members. Victor Alba has noted, quote, "These 700 members were activists and all were known in their places of work and their unions and Athenaeum, village or neighborhood. All had participated ... against the dictatorship," end quote. Victor Alba. The ideological position of the Federation BOC. The ideological position of the new party was very different from that of the then current third line period of the Third International. Victor Alba has summed up its position, quote, "Spain needs a democratic bourgeois revolution which must be carried out by the working class, since the bourgeoisie has demonstrated the bourgeoisie itself incapable of carrying out a democratic bourgeois revolution. Thus the way would be opened for the socialist revolution. The revolution must be carried forward with complete international independence, without submission to any political line not determined by the workers of the peninsula," end quote. Alba added that, quote, "This marked the international position of the new party. It would not be affiliated with the existing internationals and would defend the Russian Revolution without thereby abandoning the right and duty of criticizing what it consider the errors of the Russian Revolution's leaders," end quote. Victor Alba. Finally, quote, "It would oppose colonialism and imperialism, and it would support movements of national emancipation and colonial rebellion," end quote. Victor Alba. As a group with its principal support in Catalonia, the Federation naturally took a position on the issue of Catalan separatism. The party program said, quote, "The communists of Catalonia do not forget the double slavery which we suffer as workers submitted to a bourgeoisie and as Catalans dominated by a foreign power," end quote. It stated that it, quote, "demands the right of Catalonia, the right of all the Iberic nationalities to free determination in their own destiny, including separation," end quote, and added that, quote, "The communists of Catalonia advocate the organization of all the Iberic nations into a federation of states grouped on the basis of mutual recognition of complete internal freedom, ... Our demand is, insofar as the nationalist question is concerned, union of Iberian republics," end quote. The BOC party program. The ideological position of the Federation BOC was not exactly the orthodox one taken by affiliates of the international communist opposition, however, did reflect several basic ideas of the ICO: the right of each national communist party to run itself and to adapt basic communist ideas to the particular situation of its own country, and loyalty to the Soviet Union, although a more critical loyalty than that of most of the other ICO affiliates in 1931. New section: Early actions of the Bloque. One of the first activities of the new party was to participate in the municipal elections of April 1931, which were to result in the downfall of the Spanish monarchy. It was invited to join a coalition organized by the left-wing Catalan Autonomous Party, Esquerra Catalana. However, the Bloque rejected. It was invited to join a coalition organized by the left-wing Catalan Autonomous Party, Esquerra Catalana, and the newly formed Unió Socialista de Catalunya. However, the Bloque rejected this invitation because of its need to establish its own identity among the Catalan workers. It ran candidates of its own in all wards of Barcelona and in most of Lerida, plus in a few other municipalities. Even Bloque candidates for municipal council were elected in various cities of Catalonia, although none was successful in Barcelona. There, the Bloc got only 2,176 votes. In June 1931, after the fall of the monarchy, the Bloque took part in the campaign for the Constitutional Assembly. It received 17,536 votes in Catalonia, although it did not elect any deputies. On the 4th of October 1931, Marín was a candidate in a by-election for deputy. Voting took place on 2 successive Sundays. On the first day, Marín received 8,326 votes, the official communist candidate getting 1,264. In the runoff election, Marín received 13,702 votes compared to 42,000 for the victorious Catalan nationalist candidate. Jules Humbert Dros, who was part of a Comintern delegation seeking to reorganize the Spanish Communist Party, was impressed by the activity of the Marín group just before and after unification of the Federation and PCC. On February 25, 1931, Jules Humbert Dros wrote to Manuilsky of the Comintern that it had published 2 issues of La Batalla and was carrying out an intensive campaign against the official party. Wikipedia says Dmitry Manuilsky lived from 1883 to 1959 and was an important Bolshevik revolutionary Soviet politician and academic who was secretary of the Executive Committee of Comintern, the Communist International, from December 1926 to its dissolution in May 1943. Manuilsky added that La Batalla had published articles by Stalin and, quote, seems to want to avoid alliances with the Trotskyites, end quote. Finally, he noted that, quote, the Marinists are very active and are creating many difficulties for our party, end quote. On April 10th, Humbert Dros again reported to Manuilsky that, quote, in Catalonia there is underway a campaign of extreme violence against that party, and this has consolidated their ranks, the Bloque, in spite of contrary claims of our comrades, end quote. Humbert Dros added that, quote, the elements whom we thought we had reconquered 2 months ago are candidates of the Bloque, Obrero and Campesino of Marín, so that I don't believe the claims of our comrades who talk every day about the rapid disintegration of the party of Marín. End quote. Humbert Dros. With the fall of King Alfonso III, Colonel Francisco Macia, leader of the Esquerra Català party, proclaimed the existence of the Catalan Republic on the 13th of April 1931. Shortly afterwards, the Bloc sent a delegation of armed members to the seat of the new Catalan Republican government. It was reported that, quote, they installed themselves as a guard, they feared a reaction by the police or the army, and weren't convinced that the Esquerra would be willing to fight, end quote. I'm going to look up some things here. King Alfonso XIII. That's the first one. Alfonso XIII, who lived from 1886 to 1941, was known as El Africano, or the African due to his Africanist views, was king of Spain from his birth until the 14th of April 1931 when the Second Spanish Republic was proclaimed. Alfonso XIII became a monarch at birth as his father, Alfonso XII, had died the previous year. Alfonso's mother, Maria Cristina of Austria, served as regent until he assumed full powers on his 16th birthday in 1902. Alfonso XIII's upbringing and public image were closely linked to the military estate. He often presented himself as a soldier king. Alfonso XIII's effective reign started 4 years after the so-called 1898 disaster, when various social factions projected their expectations of national regeneration upon him. Like other European monarchs of his time, Alfonso XIII played a political role, entailing a controversial use of his constitutional executive powers. His wedding to Princess Victoria Eugenie of Battenberg in 1906 was marred by an attempt at regicide. Alfonso XIII was unharmed. With public opinion divided over World War I and moreover a split between pro-German and pro-Entente sympathizers, Alfonso XIII used his relations with other European royal families to help preserve his stance of neutrality as espoused by his government. However, several factors weakened the monarch's constitutional legitimacy. The rupture of the Turno system, the deepening of the Restoration system crisis in the 1910s, a trio of crises in 1917, the spiral of violence in Morocco, and especially the lead-up to the 1923 installment of the dictatorship of Miguel Primo de Rivera, an event that succeeded by means of both military coup d'etat and the king's acquiescence. Over the course of Alfonso XIII's reign, Over the course of Alfonso XIII's reign, the monarch ended up favoring an authoritarian solution rather than a constitutional liberalism. Upon the political failure of the dictatorship, Alfonso XIII removed support from Primo de Rivera, who was thereby forced to resign in 1930 and favored during the so-called Dicta Blanda, an attempted return to the pre-1923 state of affairs. Nevertheless, he lost most of his political capital along the way. He left Spain voluntarily after the municipal elections of April 1931, which is understood as a plebiscite on maintaining the monarchy or declaring a republic, the result of which led to the proclamation of the Second Spanish Republic on the 14th of April 1931. His efforts with the European War Office during World War I earned him a nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1917, which was ultimately won by the Red Cross. To date, Alfonso XIII remains the only monarch known to have been nominated for a Nobel Prize. So that's King Alfonso XIII. And now I'm looking for Colonel Francisco Macià. Francesc Macià was a Catalan politician who served as the 122nd president of the Generalitat of Catalonia and formerly an officer in the Spanish army. Politically, Macià evolved from an initial regenerationism of the Spain to the defense of the Catalan Republic, being appointed as the first president of the restored Generalitat and achieving the first successful establishment of self-government of Catalonia of modern history. So, back to the text. The intense activity of the Bloque paid off quickly. Within 2 months of proclamation of the Republic, its membership had doubled to between 1,300 and 1,400. The circulation of La Batalla rose from 3,000 to 30,000 and subsequently leveled off at about 7,000. The nature of Bloque organization and activity. Victor Alba has observed that perhaps, quote, 90% of the members were workers, with a high percentage of white-collar workers, but not a majority, end quote. Victor Alba has argued that the Bloque was different from the other radical and labor groups of the time. Quote, for Bloque's members, the Bloque had a special characteristic. It was necessary for the, quote, Bloquista, end quote. The Bloque was an extension of his home, and to work for the Bloque was more important than the work by which he earned his living. ... To be a member of the Bloque was converted into a way of life, end quote. Victor Alba. The Bloque did not tend to attract those primarily motivated by ambition. Victor Alba has noted that, quote, the Bloque had positions which were not easy, communist but outside the Communist International, revolutionary and working class, but defended at that moment the need for a bourgeois democratic revolution, part of the Republic but trying to prevent people from having illusions about the Republic, Marxist and therefore opposed to anarchism but working inside the CNT, internationalist but defending the rights of the nationalities and of self-determination, end quote. Victor Alba. Therefore, Victor Alba concluded, quote, to adhere to the Bloque, it was necessary not to be ambitious and to have certain political subtlety. End quote, Victor Alba. The Bloque had various subsidiary organizations. These included the Red Aid to help political prisoners and people being persecuted, the Electoral Secretariat to train members for poll watching and related activities, a feminine section designed to develop activities which would particularly appeal to women who, however, were not organized separately within the Bloque, and a proletarian theater which Victor Alba has said was, quote, mediocre, end quote, and with which Salvador Dali was associated for a short time. Two other subsidiaries of the BOC were also important. One was its defense section, the main function of which was to protect members while they put up posters and to protect meetings from attack, particularly by Stalinists. The others were the youth group, were organized at the end of 1931 for young people up to the age of 21. It was particularly active among the students and as a result was predominantly middle class. One particular center of activity of the Bloque was the, quote, Ateneo, end quote, a typical institution of pre-Civil War Catalonia and part of the heritage of anarcho-syndicalism so characteristic of the labor movement of that region. The typical Ateneo was a working-class cultural center where classes were given, lectures and debates were held, libraries are available. They were vital centers of working-class life, politics, and trade union activity. During the early 1930s, there were many Ateneos in Barcelona and provincial Catalan cities. Quite early, the BOC won control of the Ateneo Enciclopédico Popular, one of the most important in Barcelona. Victor Alba has noted that after Bloque members won control of it, its work, quote, was not a sectarian activity, but it was evident that the mere fact that its work was organized by Bloquistas favored the Bloque, end quote. The Bloque also won influence in other Ateneos in working class sections of Barcelona, as well as in interior cities. Another important activity of the BOC before the Civil War was publication of various periodicals. In Barcelona, it published La Batalla and La Urla, both weeklies. There were also publications aligned with the Bloque in smaller cities of Catalonia, including La Esperna in Girona, Avant in Lleida, Front in Sitges, and the periodicals called Avante in both Balaguer and Figueras. Finally, the Bloque participated regularly in election campaigns. In November 1932 Catalan parliament elections, it received 3,565 votes in Barcelona and thousands throughout Catalonia, compared with 37,000 votes received by the right-wing Lliga in Catalonia, and the 65,000 received by Esquerra Català in Barcelona alone. The official communists got only 1,216 votes in the entire region. In the Spanish parliamentary election of November 1933, which resulted in a right victory, the Bloque formed a coalition with the Catalan Federation of the Spanish Socialist Party, PSOE, under the name Front Obrero, Workers' Front. The ticket received 5,745 votes in Barcelona, 2,758 in the province of Barcelona, 8,103 in Gerona, 1,921 in Tarragona, and 5,521 in Lleida, for 24,048 in all of Catalonia. New section, Relations with Official Communists. Although the Bloque was clearly a dissident communist movement, the official party in the Commandeer term did not form some time did not for some time give hope of winning back its members, including Joaquin Marin. The fact was that the official party had virtually no members in Catalonia. The first attempt to win back the Bloque was taken by Jules Humbert Droz. Jules Humbert Droz has noted that, quote, in Barcelona I re-established contact with the dissident party of the Marin, where there were several comrades in whom I had confidence, but my efforts, supported by the delegation, were not sufficient to re-establish unity. Subsequently, the political bureau of the Spanish party issued an invitation to members of the Bloque to return. This aroused opposition by Bullejos, and Humbert Droz suggested that Marin and others go to Moscow to discuss the matter. Marin refused, fearing that once he was in Moscow, the Comintern would prevent his return, thus decapitating the communist opposition in Spain. The final maneuver was an attempt by the official party to appeal over Marin's head to members of his party. Mundo Obrero, the official party's weekly, published an invitation to Bloque members in June 1931 while denouncing Marin, noted that, quote, the Central Committee of the Communist Party ... issues you a warm call to return to your ranks and declares that it is disposed to admit you in bloc on the basis of acceptance without reservations of the program and the political line of the Communist International and its Spanish section, end quote. Needless to say, virtually no one accepted this invitation. In 1932, the Fifth Congress of the official party decided to establish a Communist Party of Catalonia, which would, in name at least, be directly affiliated to the Comintern. The group was set up in May 1932 with Ramon Casanellas, who had recently returned home after living in Moscow since 1921, as its Secretary General. As its Secretary General, it almost immediately issued a pamphlet, The Renegades of Communism, the Bloque, Obrero y Campesino of Marin. Spanish Wikipedia says, Ramon Casanellas lived from 1897 to 1933 and was a Spanish politician and trade unionist known for being one of the participants, along with Pedro Mateu and Luis Nicolú, in the assassination in 1921 of Eduardo Dato, president of the Council of Ministers. Back to the text, new section. Trade union activities of the Bloque. The most important field of activity of the Bloque was organized labor. A major disagreement of the Spanish opposition with the official party and the Comintern was the Stalinist insistence on setting up a separate communist-controlled labor movement. The Bloque sought, not entirely successfully, to work within the established union organizations. The labor movement of Spain in the early 1930s was split between the Unión General de Trabajadores, UGT, closely linked to the Socialist Party, and the anarcho-syndicalist Confederación Nacional de Trabajo. The CNT was overwhelmingly dominant in Catalonia, and since the Bloque was largely confined to that region, it was the CNT within the Marinistas within which the Marinistas worked. The situation within the CNT at the time of the advent of the Spanish Republic and the autonomous government of Catalonia was somewhat complicated. There were two major tendencies within the CNT, and the Bloque's followers came to constitute a third one. Dominant were the, quote, syndicalists, end quote, led by Angel Pestaña. Although revolutionaries, they were first and foremost trade unionists and fought against the use of the CNT for putschist political adventures. During the later years of the dictatorship, they had been in tacit alliance with the Spanish Republican parties and Escuela Catala. However, with the resurgence of trade union militancy after the fall of the monarchy and with the rather rapid disillusionment in the Republic among many CNT workers, Pestaña lost control to the pure anarchists, led by the semi-secret organization, the Federación Anarquista Ibérica, FAI, founded during the Primo de Rivera period to bring anarchist, quote, purity, end quote, to the CNT. The FAI led the CNT into several revolutionary general strikes and attempted uprisings in the years preceding the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War. The FAI largely dominated the CNT after 1932. The Sindicalistas were a distinct minority. The CNT faction organized by the Bloque, Obrero y Campesino, the so-called oppositsiya sindicalista revolucionario, was even smaller. It controlled a few unions in Barcelona, including the printers and commercial employees, but its major strength was outside the Catalan capital. It controlled many unions in Gerona and Tarragona, and almost all those in Lérida. There was a three-way split in the CNT in 1932. With the victory of the FAI, the syndicalists issued the Manifesto of the 30, from which they became known as the Treintistas, protesting against FAI control and withdrawing the union under influence from the CNT. They regrouped as the Sindicatos de Opposición de la CNT, opposition unions of the CNT. Spanish Wikipedia says, Treintismo was an ideological current and ultimately a movement of its own which took place within the National Confederation of Labor, the CNT. It defended the need for a preparation phase of a few years. They did not specify how many before the start of social revolution. In addition, they tried to demystify the, quote, revolutionary myth, end quote, by proposing a revolution through education and example. Their vision clashed with another more radical tendency of the union represented by the Faillista current, although the majority of its supporters were not linked to the Iberian Anarchist Federation, FAI, in favor of immediate revolution. It received its name from the document called the Manifesto of the 30, written in August 1931, sometimes called possibilists, moderates, or reformers. Among the 30-somethings were well-known anarchist militants such as Angel Pestaña, Juan López Sánchez, Juan Pereiro, Sebastián Clara, Ricardo Fornells, among others. Back to the text. The turn of the Bloque-controlled unions came next. The FAI pushed through the CNT the rule that no one could hold union office who had ever been a candidate of a political party. Those unions which refused to remove leaders who had been candidates almost exclusively of the Bloque were expelled from the CNT. Those thrown out included a handful in Barcelona and most in those of Gerona, Tarragona, and Lérida. They then established the Sindicatos Expulsados de la CNT, expelled unions of the CNT. The BOC gained influence particularly among the public utility employees and white-collar workers. The CNT had paid relatively little attention to these groups, and the CNT offered little resistance when the Bloque began to carry on extensive organizing activities. Among the public utility workers, the Bloque organized the Frente Unido de Luz y Fuerza, United Front of Light and Power, which in October 1933 succeeded in negotiating a collective agreement which provided for the 40-hour work week, sick pay, and other benefits. Among the white-collar workers, the major force was the Sindicato Mer, BOC-controlled unions, but did not join the Sindicatos Expulsados de la CNT. In the early months of 1933, it undertook a series of meetings with looks like, I don't know, there's something fucked up about this. In the early months of 1933, it undertook a series of meetings with other white-collar unions, including the Centro Autonomista de Dependencia del Comercio y de la Industria, CADCI, until then mainly a mutual benefit organization rather than a union. In September 1933, the Commercial Workers' Union Front was formed by the Sindicato Mercantil, CADCI, various autonomous unions, the gas and electricity unions, food workers, and several others. Some 80,000 workers belonged to these organizations. The Frente Único Mercantil called a strike on November 14th. Offices were closed in virtually all the commercial enterprises in Barcelona, except food stores were shut. The strike was successful, and the Minister of Labor of the Catalan government rendered an arbitration decision granting most of the workers' demands. Employers tried to take advantage of the right-wing electoral victory 3 days after the end of the strike by appealing the Catalan Minister's award to the Tribunal of the Constitutional Guarantees in Madrid. After a further show of militancy by the workers, the employers finally withdrew their appeal. The Bloque also carried on a campaign to organize the unemployed. Josep Cole, an out-of-work mason, and Andrew Sedabel, an unemployed waterworks employee, were in charge. They succeeded in establishing the Frente Obrero contra el Paro Forzoso, Workers' Front Against Unemployment, led by members of the Bloque. In February 1933, the Bloque sponsored a conference on unemployment attended by delegates from the BOC, the Unió Socialista de Catalunya, several autonomous unions, and the expelled unions of the CNT, largely due to the efforts of the Frente Obrero contra el Paro Forzoso. The Catalan Parliament passed a law in April 1933 establishing the Institute Against Unemployment, which received an appropriation of some 85.7 million pesetas in its first year of operation. The BOC was also active in trying to organize the peasants. Except for the vineyard sharecroppers, who had a powerful organization, the Unió de Rabasaires, allied with the Escuela Catala, the rural workers were poorly organized. The Bloque succeeded in establishing two groups, the Unió Agraria in the Lerida region and Asocio Social Agraria in the vicinity of Gerona or Gerona. Victor Alba has noted 1934, the Lerida group had almost as many members in that region as the Unión de Rabasaires, that is, 18,000, and in Gerona, Asocio Social Agraria had around 12,000 members. Second Congress of the Bloque. The Second Congress of the Federación Bloque took place in April 1932 in Barcelona. For 2 months, draft resolutions for this Congress had been published and discussed in La Batalla. The 4 principal resolutions passed at the Congress dealt with regional autonomy within Spain, the international situation, general political questions, and the issue of communist unity. The first of these resolutions contained a historical discussion of the different, quote, nations, end quote, within the Spanish state, surveyed the attitudes of various left and labor groups, and declared that the Federation Bloque... Sorry, there's a bug on my screen, I had to get it off. Declared the Federation Bloque, quote, puts in its program of class struggle the principle of liberty of the oppressed nations by the Spanish state, end quote, but expressed opposition to workers belonging to strictly, quote, nationalist, end quote, organizations which ignored the class struggle. The resolution on international affairs dealt particularly with Germany, where it declared, quote, through the breach opened between German socialist and communist, fascism is entering, end quote. It also called for independence of Spanish Morocco. The general political thesis restated that Bloque's belief in the need for a democratic bourgeois revolution carried out by the workers at the first step towards a socialist revolution. It also stated once again that basic issues separating the Bloque from the official communists, declaring that, quote, communism, although naturally accepting the fundamental principles of Marxism and of Leninism, will not be able to win the leadership of the working class unless communism is the direct fruit of the Iberian historical reality and not a standardized model subject to bureaucratic direction completely extraneous to our revolution. The Spanish Revolution has to be made by the Spanish workers. Revolutionary colonialism is disastrous for the march of the revolution, end quote. Finally, the resolution on communist unity stated as a fundamental requirement acceptance of democracy, however limited. Quote, communism, because communism tends towards an authentic democracy with all class vestiges removed, must conserve and treasure as something precious the elements of democracy acquired historically in the class struggle, and not refuse the benefits of democracy in any except those who, try to deprive the proletariat of it, end quote. The Congress also elected a new Central Committee, which then chose a new Executive Committee. Victor Alba has given two different versions of the new Executive Committee. In the Spanish edition of his study of the BOC, he listed its members as being Marin, Arquer, Riviera, Per Bonnet, Colome, David Rey, Miguel Ferrer. In the Catalan edition, he added Josep Cole, Eusebi Rodriguez, Salas Enrique Aldroher, and Jaime Miravities to this list, or Vitiles. I don't know. New section. The BOC and the Alianza Obrera. The Bloque, drawing a lesson from Spain, for Spain from the role of the split in the labor and radical movements of Germany and bringing Hitler to power, began to urge unification of all labor and left-wing forces in Spain. The first group to be receptive to the idea was the autonomous socialist group of Catalonia, the Unió Socialista de Catalunya, USC, which proposed that the USC and Bloque merge. The Bloque rejected this in view of the alliance of the USC with Esquerra Català, which controlled the Catalan regional government. However, the Bloque continued efforts to unite the left in Catalonia and throughout Spain. The Bloque's efforts bore fruit in November 1933 in a conference of the Labor United Front of Catalonia. This meeting laid the basis for the Alianza Obrera Workers' Alliance, which was established in December 1933. It was formed by representatives of the CNT opposition unions, the Federación Sindicalista Libertaria, the expelled unions of the CNT, the Catalan UGT, the Partido Sindicalista, recently established by Angel Pestaña, the Catalan Federation of Spanish Socialist Party, the Bloque, the Unió Socialista de Catalunya, the Trotsky Izquierda Comunista, and the Unió de Rabaceres. The Alianza Obrera had its baptism of fire 3 months later, a one-day general strike throughout Catalonia in support of similar walkout of UGT unions of Madrid in response to an employers' offensive against the labor movement there. Although the walkout had relatively little success in Barcelona, where the orthodox CNT strength was concentrated, it was virtually universal in the rest of Catalonia. As a result of this show of force, the Alianza Obrera idea began to spread outside of Catalonia. Similar groups were established in Castellón and Valencia soon after the Catalan walkout. In the Asturias region, even the local CNT joined the Alianza. Within a few weeks, there were Alianzas Obreras also in Jaén, Cordoba, Sevilla, and Madrid. A major step forward for the Alianza Obrera concept was the endorsement in July by both the UGT and the Socialist Party of the idea of local alianzas. Victor Alba has explained the reason for this spread of the Workers' Alliance idea. Quote, It began to be seen as that the Alianza was a new type of organization which not only united but multiplied the force of its components, but without demanding that its affiliated organizations make concessions or abandon principles. It was seen as that the Alianza could win strikes which without it would be lost. And it began to be believed that when the moment came it could lead to victory, because it must not be forgotten that in spite of the electoral triumph of the right, the workers maintained their offensive spirit." End quote. Victor Alba. The official communists were at first strongly opposed to the Alianza. One party leader, Francisco Galan, summed up his party's position by saying that, quote, "If I had to sit at the same table with the socialist leaders, I would blush like a virgin among prostitutes," end quote. Wikipedia says Francisco Galan Rodriguez lived from 1902 to 1971 and was a Spanish military officer. The official CP showed its disdain for labor unity by officially launching in April 1934 its own tiny trade union group, the Confederación General de Trabajadores Unidos. However, because of the shift in the Comintern's line, the Spanish communists soon reversed their position. At a plenum on the September 11th and 12th of 1934, they decided to enter the Alianzas Obreros. However, even then, they sent a delegation to Largo Caballero, head of the UGT, to try to convince Largo Caballero to give a different name to the Alianzas, as Largo Caballero himself said, a name, quote, "more in harmony with the Russian vocabulary," end quote. The first Catalan Conference of Workers' Alliances met on the 17th of June 1934. The Bloque introduced a resolution saying that if the right-wing Spanish government attacked the autonomy of Catalonia, the Workers' Alliance would take control of defense of the region and proclaim the Federal Socialist Republic. When the majority rejected this notion, the Bloque introduced and supported a resolution which said, quote, "If the counter-revolutionary government of Madrid attacks Catalonia, and as a result the Catalan Republic is proclaimed here, the Alianza Obrera will support the movement seeking to take control of it with the purpose of leading it toward the triumph of the Federal Socialist Republic," end quote. The Bloque, the Alianza, the events of October 1934, new section. Wikipedia says, the Revolution of 1934, also known as the Revolution of October 1934, the Revolutionary General Strike of 1934, was a revolutionary strike movement that took place between the 5th and 19th of October 1934 during the Black Biennium of the Second Spanish Republic. The revolts were triggered by the entry of the conservative Spanish Confederation of the Autonomous Right, CEDA, into the Spanish government. Most of the events occurred in Catalonia and Asturias and were supported by many Spanish Socialist Workers' Party and General Union of Workers members, notably Largo Caballero, as well as members of the Confederación Nacional del Trabajo. Historians have argued that the incident sharpened antagonism between the political right and left in Spain and was part of the reason for the later Spanish Civil War. Around 2,000 people were killed during the uprising, which was repressed by Spanish government forces. Back to the text. The culmination of the Alianza Obrera movement was the frustrated insurrection of October 1934. The principal centers of the rebellion were Catalonia and the Asturias region, where the Alianza Obreras had their principal centers of strength. The immediate cause of the October 1934 events was entry into the government of the most powerful elements of the Spanish right, the Confederación Española de Rechas Autónomas. Shit. Where am I? CEDA, CEDA, headed by Jose Maria Gil Robles, on October 4th. When Gil Robles was named Minister of War, a new cabinet headed by Alejandro Lerroux. A bunch of names to look up here. So first of all, CEDA was the Confederación Española de Derechas Autónomas, literally Spanish Confederation of Autonomous Rights. CEDA was a Spanish political party in the Second Spanish Republic, a Catholic conservative force. CEDA was the political heir of Ángel Herrera's Oria's Acción Popular, and defined itself in terms of the, quote, affirmation and defense of the principles of Christian civilization, end quote, translating this theoretical stand into a political demand for the revision of anti-Catholic passages of the Republican Constitution. CEDA saw itself as a defensive organization formed to protect religious toleration, family, and private property rights. Jose Maria Gil Robles declared his intention to, quote, give Spain a true unity, a new spirit, a totalitarian polity, end quote, and went on to say, quote, democracy is not an end but a means to achieve the conquest of the new state. When the time comes, either Parliament submits or we will eliminate Parliament, end quote. The CEDE held fascist-style rallies, called Gil Robles Jefe, the Castilian Spanish equivalent of Duce, which is what they called Mussolini, and sometimes debated whether CEDA might lead a, quote, march on Madrid, end quote, similar to the Italian fascist march on Rome to forcefully seize power. The CEDA claimed that it was defending the Catholic Church in Spain and, quote, Christian civilization against authoritarian socialism, state atheism, and religious persecution. CEDA often claimed that the far-left political parties leading the Second Spanish Republic had already made politics a matter of Marxism versus anti-Marxism. With the advent of the rise of the Nazi Party to power in Germany, the CEDA emulated the propaganda ploys of the Nazis, including a similar emphasis upon obedience to authority, extreme nationalism, and social hierarchy. Gil Robles observed a Nazi Party rally in Nuremberg and was greatly influenced by it, henceforth becoming committed to creating a single anti-Marxist pro-Catholic political party in Spain. CEDA was largely the party of practicing Roman Catholics, the middle class, and small-holding farm families that ultimately became the most popular individual party in Spain in the 1936 elections. The CEDA failed to make the substantive electoral gains from 1933 to 1936, though it did see an increase in the number of individual votes that were needed for it to form government. This resulted in right-wing voters draining away and turning instead towards the monarchist Renovación Española political party and its leader José Calvo Sotelo. Outrage over both Calvo Sotelo's 1936 assassination and the Red Terror unleashed by death squads linked to all far-left parties against the Catholic Church in Spain led to CEDA abandoning moderation and providing support for the military uprising against the Republic, which included donating its electoral funds to the initial leaders of the nationalist faction. General Emilio Mola. Subsequently, many members of CDA's youth movement, Juventudes de Acción Popular, Youth for Popular Action, defected en masse to the Falange Española de las Juntas de Ofensiva Nacional Sindicalista, or, quote, Falange, end quote. So that's CEDA, CEDA. And Jose Maria Gil Robles y Quiñones lived from 1898 to 1980 and was a prominent Spanish politician, leader of the CEDA, and prominent figure in the period leading up to the Spanish Civil War. He served as a Minister of War from May to December 1935. In the 1936 elections, the CEDA was defeated and support for Gil Robles and his party evaporated. Gil Robles was unwilling to struggle with Francisco Franco for power, and in April 1937 he announced the dissolution of CEDA and went into exile. Abroad, Jose Maria Gil Robles announced the negotiated with Spanish monarchs to try to arrive at a common strategy for taking power in Spain. In 1968, he was named a professor of the University of Oviedo and published his book No fue posible la paz. Peace was not possible. He was a member of the International Tribunal at The Hague. After the death of Franco and the end of his regime, Gil Robles became one of the leaders of the, quote, Spanish Christian Democracy Party, which however failed to win support in the Spanish general elections in 1977. And finally, Alejandro Lerroux Garcia lived from 1864 to 1949 in Madrid, was a Spanish politician who was the leader of the Radical Republican Party. He served as the Prime Minister 3 times from 1933 to 1935 and held several cabinet posts as well. A highly charismatic politician, he was distinguished by his demagogical and populist political style. Alright. Back to the text. The alianzas obreras throughout Spain with support of the Socialist Party and the Unión General de Trabajadores, but without that of the CNT, reacted to installation of the Lerroux Gil Robles government by calling a national general strike for Saturday, October 6th. Throughout most of Spain, the movement was limited to an almost unanimous walkout. In Catalonia and Asturias, it became a revolution. The situation in Catalonia was very confused. The Alianza Obrera dominated the labor movement outside Barcelona. In the early hours of October 6th, the Alianza seized control of most of the interior towns and cities. In some places it proclaimed the Catalan Republic, in others the Catalan Socialist Republic. In some places even local units of the CNT participated. However, the situation was different in Barcelona, where the CNT leadership did not support the general strike, even though the masses of CNT members participated in it. The middle-class Catalan nationalists who controlled the regional government were very hesitant about taking any revolutionary steps without CNT backing, even though the Esquerra party had at its disposal not only the police of the capital but also a party militia of the extreme nationalist group. Estat Català, popularly known as the Escamats or action groups, led by Josep Dencas. I'm not seeing quite anything for Estat Català. Let's see if anything comes up for Escamats. According to Spanish Wikipedia, the Escamats were a paramilitary organization created by the Estat Català party shortly after it was founded as a political organization in 1922. According to historian Enrique Ucellay Dacal, the term Escamat was coined by Manuel Pages, I don't know. Second in command of Daniel Cardona, who preferred to use this word meaning platoon instead of esquadra to differentiate himself from the Italian fascist squadristi. And Estat Català is a Catalan independence political party founded by Francesc Macià as a, quote, Catalan nationalist political and combat organization. On July 18, 1922, Estat Català is the oldest party in Catalonia that continues in asset. I don't know what that means. At its inception, Estat Català would be considered an insurrectionalist party. Since armed actions against the dictatorship of Primo de Rivera and the international dissemination of Catalonia's independence ambitions were its main activities. It defines itself as an interclass and non-dogmatic independence party, fighting for the independence of the so-called Catalan countries and the establishment of Catalan as the only official language. It aims to be the third nationalist party in Europe after the Basque Nationalist Party and Ireland's Sinn Féin. And Josep Denkas lived from 1900 to 1966 and was a Catalan nationalist politician active in the Republican left of Catalonia. Josep Denkas, a supporter of Catalan independence movement, Josep Denkas served as the interior minister of the short-lived Catalan state during the turbulent events of the 6th of October. He was considered a leading figure of the Catalan version of fascism. And Wikipedia says the events of October 6 were a general strike, armed insurgency, and declaration of a Catalan state by Catalonia's autonomous government on the 6th of October 1934 in reaction to the inclusion of conservatives in the Republican regime of Spain. They took place as part of a nationwide strike and armed action known as the Revolution of 1934. Catalan President Lluís Companys declared the Catalan state at 8 p.m. Martial law was declared, and military forces attacked the Palau de la Generalitat de Catalunya, Palace of the Government of Catalonia, and other buildings. Companys surrendered on the morning of the 7th of October. Back to the text. Although in previous months the Esquimats had many clashes with CNT unions and had broken some CNT strikes, the Esquimats agreed with the CNT on October 6, 1934, and opposed any precipitous action. Although they had 12,000 men armed with rifles and other weapons, they did not move out of their headquarters all day. For its part, the CNT leadership's only action was to order their followers back to work once the revolutionary movement had collapsed. It was the Alianza Obrera which worked to convert the general strike into an armed uprising. To this end they sought two things: that President Lluís Companys proclaim the Catalan Republic, and that Lluís Companys and the Esquimats provide arms for the workers with which to defend that republic. Several times on the 6th of October, the leaders of the Alianza met with President Companys, urging that Companys proclaim the separatist republic and arm the workers. In late afternoon, they organized a march of workers past the headquarters of the regional government. Finally, 8 o'clock in the evening, from the balcony of the Generalidad, the Catalan government headquarters, Lluís Companys proclaimed, quote, the Catalan state with the Spanish Federal Republic, end quote. Within the Spanish Federal Republic, end quote. However, President Companys was satisfied with the mere gesture of proclaiming the Catalan state. Companys took no moves to defend the Catalan state. Neither Companys' government nor the Esquimats made arms available to the workers already in the streets and willing to fight for the new Catalan regime as part of the wider revolutionary movement throughout Spain. Only an hour after proclamation of the new Catalan state, General Domènec Batet, who was to be shot by the rebels at the beginning of the Civil War in July 1936, ordered army troops out of the barracks, and by 10 p.m. they were in front of the Generalidad. Wikipedia says Domènec Batet, who lived from 1872 to 1937, was a Spanish military man who became general of the Spanish army. Starting as a lieutenant, Batet quickly escalated ranks during the Cuban War of Independence. After the disaster of Anual, as a colonel, Batet took part in the investigation of the defeat, taking part in the drafting of the Picasso file. During the Second Spanish Republic, Domènec Batet was designated chief of the 4th Organic Division in Catalonia and crushed the Catalan uprising of October the 6th. With the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War, Batet remained loyal to the Republic and was deployed in Burgos, where his subordinates betrayed him and captured him for the nationalists. After months of captivity, Franco ordered the execution of Batet. Back to the text. Cannons turned on the building, the Generalidad. At 6:30 p.m. on the morning of October 7th, President Campanis and his government surrendered to Batet. Victor Alba has noted that in Catalonia, quote, the surrender came without a defeat. The Escamots, the Alianza, arms and many people were available for action. All Catalonia was in the power of the Alianza or the Esquerra. In the towns near Barcelona, workers and rabasaires had begun to mobilize, all ready to intervene without waiting further orders for which never came, end quote. Alba has argued that it was, quote, fear of the worker, not of the army, end quote, which brought about capitulation of the Catalan government. Victor Alba added that, quote, possibility of the Alianza would not have been strong enough to take over the leadership of the struggle if it had really begun, but Campanis did not wish to risk it, end quote. John Brademas in his study of the CNT largely agreed with Alba. Wikipedia says John Brademas was an American politician and educator originally from Indiana. Is this the same guy? Let's see. Let me type in CNT. I don't know, I can't really find anything. I don't think this is the same guy. So, John Brademas, in his study of the CNT, largely agreed with Victor Alba. John Brademas noted that, quote, in spite of its initial success, the Barcelona movement failed because the Esquerra was not interested in social revolutions, and Esquerra's military arm was pure and simply fascist as well as separatist, because the CNT stood aside, because the coalition in charge of the Generalidad ignored its own proletarian base, the Alianza Obrera, refusing it to the arms for 10,000 men, which it possessed, end quote. The situation was substantially different in the Asturias region. There, as Victor Alba has noted, quote, the Alianza Obrera did not have to wait the collaboration of the Republicans. It did not fear the revolution. It fought for 2 weeks, and the government had to use the forces of the Tercio Foreign Legion to put down the uprising of the miners, end quote. Victor Alba noted that the Bloque had only a small number of members in the Asturian region, but that, quote, they occupied posts of responsibility in the local committees that organized local life during the time that the workers dominated Asturias, end quote. Victor Alba. The essential difference between Catalonia and Asturias, of course, was that organized labor was split in Catalonia and completely united in Asturias. The CNT, although a distinct minority in Asturian labor, belonged to the Alianza and cooperated fully with the insurrection. This was of key importance since most industrial workers in the region belonged to the CNT, while miners and other organized workers were in the UGT. Victor Alba felt that the experience in Asturias confirmed the correctness of the Bloque's advocacy of the Alianza Obrero. If the Alianza had not been established in Catalonia under the BOC leadership, it would not have arisen elsewhere. He noted the importance of the Asturian uprising of 1934 and foreshadowing what would happen with the outbreak of the Civil War less than 2 years later. Quote, "The militia, the collectivization, and the committees which appeared at the beginning of the Civil War were found in embryo in the Asturian experience of 1934. End quote. Victor Alba. In Valencia, the BOC, local units of the Socialist Party and the UGT, the official communists, and some elements of the CNT all participated in the movement of October. The general strike in Valencia was virtually unanimous, and the Alianza Obrera were resolved to convert the general strike into a revolutionary movement on the morning of October 7th. The local CNT port workers leader was to take over an army barracks where there were many sympathizers with the movement. Molina Conejero of the UGT PSOE was to seize the headquarters of the provincial government, and Julian Gorkin was to raise the red flag from the balcony of the city hall to proclaim the Social Republic before a crowd which would be massed for the purpose. However, all these plans came to naught with the surrender of the Catalan government, making the struggle in Valencia appear hopeless. New section. Moves to expand the Bloque. After failure of the October 1934 insurrection, one of the Bloque's major objectives was conversion of the Alianzas Obreras into a national organization. However, because of constant blows of the rightist government against left-wing parties and the labor movement, and in part too as a result of growth of the Popular Front movement elsewhere in Europe, the Popular Front by the end of 1935 took the place of the Alianza Obrera despite the wishes of Joaquin Marin and his fellows. In pursuing its second objective, that of forming a broader party of revolutionary Marxists, the Bloque faced two possible alternatives: to enter the Socialist Party, PSOE, which was already split into several factions and where the Bloque people might have had considerable influence, or to unite with a number of other relatively small groups in Catalonia and form a party which might at least be a significant bidder for power in that part of Spain. Each of these alternatives was explored. There were elements within the PSOE in late 1934 and much of 1935 who were anxious to see the Bloque enter the party. Principal among these were Santiago Carrillo. Santiago Carrillo was a Spanish politician who served as General Secretary of the Communist Party of Spain from 1960 to 1982. During the Civil War, he was placed at the head of the Republican militia and was in charge of maintaining public order in Madrid. Some hold him responsible for the massacres of Franco's prisoners that took place at the end of 1936. He was exiled during the dictatorship of Francisco Franco, becoming a leader of the democratic opposition to the regime. His role as leader of the PCE would later make him a key figure in the transition to democracy. He later embraced Eurocommunism and democratic socialism and was a member of the Congress of Deputies from 1977 to 1986. At the same time, the Catalan branch of the PSOE issued a formal invitation to the Bloque to enter the Socialist Party, promising that they would be given representation in the national leadership of the PSOE. Largo Caballero also favored the idea. However, Marin rejected this, saying that even with the Bloque group in the PSOE, the right center was likely to win out, and by then former Bloque people would be hamstrung in their search for revolutionary socialist unity. For Marin, the important thing was, quote, not that we communists unite with Besteiro and Prieto, bracket, leaders of the right and center of the Socialist Party, end bracket, but that the communists and left socialists meet and work together, which is not precisely the same thing, end quote. Marin's position did not get unanimous support from the Bloque leadership. Julian Gorkin, perhaps the second most prestigious figure in the BOC at the time, favored entry into the Socialist Party. He felt that the strongest labor political group in Catalonia, and perhaps equal importance with the socialists in Valencia region, the Bloque could be an important factor in preventing left-wing socialists from being infiltrated and taken over by official communists. However, the Bloque overwhelmingly rejected entry into the PSOE. The irony of this was that many of those socialists who were so anxious in 1935 to have the opposition communists come into their own party ended up as Stalinists. Santiago Carrillo led the socialist youth into unification with the communist youth to form the Juventud Socialista Unificado, which joined the Young Communist International. As this is being written in 1979, Santiago Carrillo is Secretary General of the Communist Party of Spain. The Catalan branch of the PSOE merged with the Catalan Communists and several other groups to form the Partido Socialista Unificado de Catalunya, member of this Comintern, which during the Civil War became the most violent persecutor of the opposition communists. In 1935, there was unity discussions in Catalonia involving the Bloque, Izquierda Comunista of Andrés Nin, and Unió Socialista de Catalunya, the official Catalan Communist Party, the Catalan Federation of the PSOE, the Partit Català Proletari, a working-class Catalan nationalist group. Where am I? Sorry, I'm looking for this communist left group. Ah, we are. Izquierda Comunista of Andrés Nin, or it translates as the Communist Left of Spain, ICE, also known as the Communist Left, was a Spanish political party of Marxist ideology during the 1930s. In 1930, Leon Trotsky and his followers within the international communist movement had formed the international left opposition to bring together the Bolshevik Leninists, as the communists opposed to Stalinism called themselves worldwide. That same year, Spanish oppositionists formed the Communist Opposition of Spain, the Spanish section of the International Left Opposition, with the aim of organizing those expelled from the Communist Party of Spain, PCE, and those still active in it. After its second national conference, March 1932, and the confirmation of the impossibility of reforming the PCE according to its postulates, the Communist Opposition of Spain was established as a political party under the name of ICE. Its membership reached 1,000 members. Its main support spaces were in Madrid, Catalonia, Asturias, Castile, and Leon, Extremadura, where it had great strength in the province of Badajoz, especially in the Llerena and its surroundings. It carried its union work within the General Union of Workers. Led by Andrés Nin, Juan Andrade, Enrique Fernández Sendón, and Grandizo Muniz, among others, the ICE participated in the Alianza Obrera and the Asturias Revolution of 1934, that staged the turn to the left towards revolutionary positions of the socialist youth of Spain. Made its leaders, such as Santiago Carrillo, proposed to the ICE to enter the socialist organizations to contribute to it, a process known as Bolshevization. As a result of this, the ICE experienced a crucial internal debate between those in favor of joining the PSOE, led by Grandizo Muniz, and those in favor of merging with the worker and peasant bloc of Joaquin Marin, led by Andres Nin, and who turned out to be the majority. The ICE merged with the BOC in September 1935, giving rise to the Marxist Unification Workers' Party, POUM, and breaking its political ties with Trotsky, a supporter of the other option. The official organ of the ICE was the magazine Kommunismo and its theoretical debate organ, a Soviet. As a side note, that's the Trotskyists in the during the Spanish Civil War were led by Grandizo Muniz and would be this other group that Trotsky favored. They were called the Bolshevik Leninists, as Trotskyists tended to do at the time. Back to the text. However, it soon became clear that it would not be possible to bring all of these into a single organization. The Bloque and Izquierda Comunista were both opposed to the close association of the Unión Socialista with the middle-class Esquerra Catalana, an alliance the USC was not willing to give up. Also, the official communists threw roadblocks in the way of unity, announcing that they would not unite with the, quote, renegades, end quote, of the Bloque and the traitors of Izquierda Comunista. New section. Andres Nin and the Izquierda Comunista. The only group with which the Bloque clearly had enough in common with to permit merger was Izquierda Comunista, a small faction led by Andres Nin, an early leader of the Spanish Communist Party and longtime personal friend of Joaquin Marin. While in Moscow working for the Red and International Labor Unions, Andres Nin had been an ally of Marin and the Catalan and Balearic Federation of the Communist Party. However, when he returned to Spain in September 1930, he did not join it. Although having for a while supported Bukharin, Andres Nin, before returning home, would become a follower of Trotsky, with whom he maintained contact in exile. Andres Nin was, quote, in a quandary, end quote, about the BOC because, quote, he wanted to enter the party which was being formed and knew that it would have some importance, but at the same time, out of loyalty to Trotsky, he knew that he would have to enter it to conquer the new party and convert it to Trotskyism, end quote. The Catalan Communist Federation had its own reservations about Nin, which had some justification in Nin's correspondence with Trotsky. Nin wrote that, quote, it is necessary to enter the Federation to carry on systematic work and to create a faction, end quote. Meanwhile, he had taken over leadership of the tiny Spanish Trotskyite group, the, quote, Spanish section of the Communist Opposition, end quote. Under his direction, the Trotskyites began to issue a periodical, Comunismo. Although Andres Nin and the Spanish Trotskyites were critical of the Marin group, they continued to have some contact with it until, in September 1932, Trotsky ordered that they break all relations. Trotsky was becoming generally unhappy with his Spanish followers. In December 1933, Trotsky criticized them publicly and wrote of the, quote, danger and the falsehood of the policy of Comrade Nin, end quote. The final break came in September 1934. An editorial in Comunismo reported that, quote, the Spanish opposition had broken with the International Trotskyist Organization because they refused to accept the new tactic established by Trotsky to enter the socialist parties, end quote, to take them over. By this time, the Spanish Trotskyites had changed their name to Izquierda Comunista. They had no more than a dozen members in Catalonia, but had 100 in Madrid, and perhaps 500 in the Asturian and Basque areas, and scattered members in Galicia and elsewhere. New section, Formation of the POUM. The possibility of unifying the Bloque and Izquierda Comunista first arose in conversations between Marin and Nin at meetings at the Catalan Aliança Obrero. However, there was opposition in both groups to such a union. Some members of Izquierda Izquierda Comunista preferred to enter the PSOE, while there were those in the Bloque who feared that the Izquierda, which until a few months ago had been the Spanish Trotskyite group, by joining the BOC was following the quote French turn end quote ordered by Trotsky. These members of the Bloque leadership, Miguel Ferrer, Eusebi, Rodriguez Salas, and Colome, withdrew from the bloc in protest against the merger. In 1936, all became members of the Stalinist PSUC. Unification of the bloc and Izquierda Comunista would be a somewhat one-sided affair. The bloc had several thousand members, some influence in Catalan organized labor, and enough electoral strength at least to elect municipal councillors. Izquierda Comunista had at most a few hundred members and no trade union following. Obviously, Izquierda Comunista had considerable to gain by joining a much larger group. However, what advantages unification might have for the Bloque were less clear. But Victor Alba has noted that Izquierda Comunista would bring, quote, various distinguished members who would be good theoreticians, and some nuclei which could aid the expansion of the Bloque in the rest of Spain, end quote. Final steps toward unity of the two groups consisted of a clandestine congress of the Bloque, quote, a consultation by letters of members of the Izquierda Comunista, both of which were favorable to merger, and finally a clandestine congress at Los Planes near Barcelona on September 29, 1935. The new party was christened Partido Obrero de Unificación Marxista, POUM, Workers' Party of Marxist Unity. Its founding Congress adopted various resolutions and elected a new Central Committee, which chose an Executive Committee, Joaquin Marin as General Secretary, Pare Bonet, Jordi Aguirre, Joseph Call, Josep Rovira, and all the Bloque, and Andrés Nin, Narcís Molins y Fábrega, Enrique Gironella, and Tomás Tuso from Izquierda Comunista. Wikipedia says, this is Catalan Wikipedia, believe it or not. Narcís Molins y Fabregas lived from 1901 to 1962 and was a Catalan journalist and politician. He was raised as a farmer, but at the age of 18 he left for Barcelona, where he began an apprenticeship as a pastry chef. Later he was editor of La Nau. He joined the Catalan Balearic Communist Federation, and with it he joined the Bloc Obrero y Camperol, BOC, where he was editor of its mouthpiece, La Hora. However, he did not dedicate himself exclusively to journalism until he entered La Humanitat. Close to the theses of Andrés Nin, Narcís Molins y Fabregas was expelled from the BOC, accused of deviationism. Then he joined the Spanish Communist opposition and followed Nin, where he transformed it into the Communist Left. When EC joined the Marxist Unification Workers' Party, POUM, he was a member of the Executive Committee. During the Spanish Civil War, he worked for the press service of the Generalitat de Catalunya. At the same time, he was the director of Avant and editor-in-chief of La Batalla. Once the Stalinist repression against the POUM began, he took refuge in Paris, where with Victor Sergi began a campaign to defend the party. When the Nazis approached Paris, he went to Algeria and from there to Mexico in 1940. He denounced the Nazi genocide with the illustrator Josep Bartoli. In 1956, he graduated in anthropology and then left for Caracas, but in 1950 he definitely settled in Cuautla. it looks like Enrique Gironella, which in Wikipedia says Enrique Adroher y Pascual, lived from 1908 to 1987, also known by the nickname of Gironella. Okay, so it's his nickname. He worked as a school teacher. In 1928, he joined FAI and published his first articles in Solidaridad Obrera. In 1930, he already considered himself a communist and militant in the Agrupación Comunista de Madrid. In 1931, he was a member of the executive committee of the Workers' and Peasants' Bloc, BOC. In 1934, Gironella participated in the organization of the Catalan Federation of Teacher Workers within the UGT, of which he was elected General Secretary, and he collaborated with the newspaper La Batalla. He was founder, militant, and leader of the Marxist Unification Workers' Party in 1935. When the Spanish Civil War broke out, he was the POUM's representative in the Committee of Anti-Fascist Militias of Catalonia. He took part in the events of May, was arrested, spent a week in Czech prison, and then was prosecuted, accused of collaboration with the fascists, sentenced to 15 years in prison. With Franco's victory in the Spanish Civil War, he had to go into exile in France and then in Mexico, where he was the promoter of the movement of the Socialist United States of Europe. In 1962, he organized and participated in the so-called Contubernai de Munich. In 1976, he led a social democratic split within the POUM that joined the Socialist Party of Catalonia Congrés, PSCC. In 1978, he was elected president of the Catalan Council of the European Movement. In 1935, he received the Grand Cross of Isabel I the Catholic, and in 1986, the Cross of San Jordi. In June 1987, he signed a letter addressed to Mikhail Gorbachev, secretary of the CPSU, asking him to make public any data that might exist in the Soviet archives on the kidnapping and subsequent murder of Andres Nin. And Tomás Tuso. Not seeing anything. Anyway, back to the text. Victor Alba claimed that, quote, in the POUM were almost all of the founders of the official Communist Party, end quote. At its inception, it had some 7,000 members. It controlled unions in Catalonia, which claimed 60,000 members, compared with 1,440,474 in the UGT and 1,577,537 in the CNT. The Socialist Party was said to have about 100,000 members. The POUM was a Marxist-Leninist party. The POUM's fundamental positions were stated in a pamphlet issued shortly after its formation. Quote, first, the Spanish Revolution is a revolution of the democratic socialist type. Second, once power is taken, transitory establishments of the dictatorship of the proletariat. The organs of power will be the alianzas obreros. The dictatorship of the proletariat presupposes the most ample and complete workers' democracy. The party of the revolution cannot and should not strangle working-class democratization. Third, the need for the Alianza Obrera locally and nationally. The Alianza Obrera must necessarily pass through the three phases: organ of united front, organ of insurrection, organ of power. Fourth, recognition of the problems of nationalities. Spain will be structured as the Iberic Union of Socialist Republics. Fifth, democratic solution in its first phase of the problem of land, the land for him who works it. Sixth, in the face of war, transformation of imperialist war into civil war. Seventh, the United Party will remain outside of the Second and Third Internationals, both failures, struggling for world revolutionary socialist unity on new bases. Eighth, defense of the USSR, but not favoring its policy of pacts with capitalist states, but support of international revolutionary action of the working class. Right to criticize policy of the leaders of the USSR, which work against progress of the world revolution. Sixth, permanent system of democratic centralism, end quote. The Bloque and the international communist opposition. The Federación Comunista Ibérica, Bloque, Obrero y Campesino, and later the POUM were associated with the international communist opposition rather than being an integral part of it. Bertram Wolff wrote of the POUM that it was, quote, close enough to the Communist Party opposition to have sent a delegation from their armed forces to address us during the Civil War, but I think they had no organic ties with the opposition here, end quote. In another letter, Bertram Wolfe said that the Lovestoneites, quote, had fraternal relations with the POUM, end quote. It is clear that the ICO and its affiliates looked upon the Federation Bloque as their counterpart in Spain. An official report on the July 1932 International Conference of the ICO said that, quote, the Iberian Communist Federation, the opposition party in Spain, had been invited to the conference for the purposes of information and for expression of opinion. From Comrade Joaquin Marin, there came a detailed report about the activity of this organization, ... The conference empowered the Bureau to answer in detail and to maintain connections with the Spanish comrades, end quote. The parties belonging to the ICO kept a sympathetic eye on the, quote, Marine group, end quote, as they frequently referred to them. Their attitude was one of friendly criticism. In a long article in July 1932, Bertram Wolfe noted that the position of the BOC, quote, is in general correct, certainly far more correct than that of the official CP or the Trotsky group, end quote. Wolfe then criticized certain theoretical formulations of Marine, but added that, quote, the Federation of the Workers' Peasant Bloc, ... have rightly insisted on the restoration of party democracy and have maintained democracy in their own ranks. They have preserved a thoroughly communist orientation and their interest in international communist matters, end quote. Although maintaining fraternal relations with the ICO and its member parties, the Federation BOC also took an active part in the so-called London Bureau. Soon after the London Bureau's first conference in 1933, Workers' Age published an article by Marine with an introduction which noted that, quote, it will be clear to all readers of Workers' Age that the views of Comrade Marine on the Paris conference are not quite those of the communist opposition. With his analysis of Trotskyism, we are in full agreement, end quote. The relations between the international communist opposition and the POUM were to be much closer during the Spanish Civil War. Also, there was a rapprochement between the London Bureau and the ICO, which eliminated one of the main stumbling blocks in relations between the Marine group and the international communist opposition. However, during the period of the existence of the BOC, it is clear that although the ICO affiliates regarded the Marine group as fundamentally their counterpart in Spain, it did not form an integral part of the international communist opposition. As we noted at the beginning of this chapter, therefore, the Federation Bloque was, quote, associated with, end quote, rather than, quote, affiliated to, end quote, the ICO. That's the end of the piece. But I'm trying to find something on the ICO, but the internet on my phone, on my computer, is not cooperating, and I can't do that. So that's it. Thanks for listening.